When the first couple details started coming out about Modern Warfare 3's new zombies experience, I was worried. I had some big problems with Outbreak as a mode, and then after the announcement, I played my first couple games of DMZ, and that wasn't really my thing either. And not only that, but the main talking point from all the content creators that got early access was that it was very much not designed for solo, which is how I play. It was sounding like it was being built in a lab to be the exact opposite of something I would enjoy. I still did give it a chance because, if nothing else, I played Vanguard for 9 months, why not this too? And I was surprised, but I did actually end up getting hooked, and I thought it had some really interesting ideas. But I did end up falling off after the first couple seasons, and that's what this video is about. I think there's one major reason for that, and it might not be exactly what you think. Still, MWZ did have some promise, and I wanted to give it a bit of a eulogy. To be clear, this isn't a full entry in the retrospective series because it's not going to be a super comprehensive breakdown. I just wanted to talk about my favorite thing and least favorite thing to kind of say goodbye now that we have a new game to sink our teeth into. The full video is coming one day, but I have to get through 3 other full games first. The big improvement MWZ made on Outbreak was how much more full and dynamic the world felt. Part of that was what they did on the gameplay level with the objectives. Instead of 3 or 4 major missions spread out across that massive map, they broke them up into smaller, more bite-sized contracts and activities that you could do in under 2 minutes, and then they put them all over the place. So now you could move around the map while you're working on different things, instead of Outbreak where you would get to an objective, do it, and then have to mindlessly auto-run across a big gulf of nothing to get to the next one. Even when you don't have a contract, just at a base level, the world feels so much more alive around you. Like, for example, I think pretty much everyone avoids any contract that spawns mercenaries because they're just a more annoying enemy type to deal with. But when you just pass by a camp in the open world and they start shouting and shooting at you from a distance, it gives you a bit of a jolt. It makes you feel like the game space is a living, breathing place where things are constantly happening whether you're involved or not, instead of events only happening when you actively press a button. Obviously, the bigger contributor to that feeling is the fact that there are real people running around the map that actually do have their own goals independent of you. The big Warzone style lobbies were the thing I was most worried about coming into this game, and it ended up being maybe my favorite feature. For one, you get way more of those little 10-second interactions that just make the world feel that much more dynamic. When you're just jogging down the street and then an LTV suddenly blazes past with rockets raining down around it, or looking out over a cliff and seeing other teams dealing with HVTs and escorting rovers in the distance. But more than that, something I would have never in a million years expected was this emergent camaraderie that developed in the community. When I think of random zombies lobbies, the best case scenario is usually people not buying their doors and not being able to coordinate pack-a-punch the entire game. Here, something about the way rewards were distributed and the limited game length and the lack of PvP, or even really competition, all synced up to create this perfect environment for people to just actually be cool to each other. If you die and ask for a revive in chat, it's pretty much guaranteed that multiple people will go out of their way to help you. They don't get anything for it unless you manually give it to them, but people still do it just because they know they'd hate it if they lost all their gear. A lot of people, when they get an extra copy of the super rare ray gun schematics, will reach out and offer it to anyone in the lobby who doesn't have it yet. There is such a sense of community. Everyone around you is an anonymous stranger that you'll never see again, but there's zero of any of the trolling that you'd expect to come with that kind of anonymity. It really feels like everyone is on the same side. You don't have to, but you can also make that official and join up with people to work on contracts together. Admittedly, it did take them a second to patch in the ability to leave a squad easily too, but once that was there, I think it was the perfect system. Loading up a public match of round-based zombies is a lot of power to give a total stranger. You're putting potentially hours of your life in their hands, hoping that they're not annoying and don't take your favorite spot, or the wonder weapon, or that they don't kill your zombies. They did realize this was a problem during Cold War, and so they added the option to queue into a fixed-length game, but I don't think that was a perfect solution because you might want to keep playing that game after you get into it, and there's no way to, even though the round-based formula supports that. With MWZ, you know what you're getting into up front. Games are an hour long, maybe a little longer if you do a Dark Aether run, but it doesn't feel like as much of a gamble, and the gameplay loop is designed from the ground up to support that fixed length. And the reward rifts are per player. No one can steal your loot, so you never feel like you're competing with your teammates. There's no downside to working together, it's all upside. You get more helping hands, and you get more loot. And if all of that isn't working out and you do still want to leave, you can. With a single button press, you can seamlessly keep playing that same game solo or with another squad or exfil on your own terms, all with no penalty. You don't have to quit out and feel like you wasted all that time. As someone who usually only ever plays solo, I got forced out of my comfort zone to be able to play this, and I ended up loving it because I kept having these really fun and memorable interactions that I never would have let myself have in a different mode. It's definitely a very different experience than the classic Horde mode, and it's not something that I would want to fully replace that. But as something separate, I think MWZ had a super solid foundation. This is definitely the best place to keep building off of for both the objective-based and the open-world ideas that they keep trying to explore. But now that all the content is out, I can officially say that that's all it is. It's just a foundation. Once again, I think they made a cool experiment, but it's not a finished or truly great standalone game. In my opinion, there's one fundamental reason for that, and it's not exactly the same one that everyone talks about. It's not a secret that Modern Warfare Zombies had a problem with lack of content. When it released, it was super bare bones, but we had the hope that with the live service updates, they could bring it up to par. But then, every season, we all watched the zombies section on the roadmaps just get smaller and smaller. So yes, it's easy to say that it just needed more support. But it's not just quantity, it also matters what that stuff is, and maybe more importantly, where it is in the gameplay loop. Pretty much everything that was added post-launch was endgame content. The main selling points were all of the Dark Aether rifts, the new tier 4 and 5 zones that were the only place to get any of the fun new items. The only thing we got in all of Season 4 was the Unstable Rift, probably technically the most difficult thing in the entire game. Definitely not the most interesting or fun, but just in terms of raw damage output required and number of zombies on the map at a time. The story missions were only tier 2 difficulty, but by design, they're not really repeatable. You just run through them once like a campaign mission, and then maybe a second time to get the keys for the Dark Aether that season, but they don't really factor into the amount of things you're actually doing day in, day out. At a surface level, you might think it's a good idea to focus on the endgame. Isn't it a no-brainer for you as a developer to assume that players have done everything in the game already, and for DLC to be something for them to do after that? But you also have to consider what kind of game MWZ is. That assumption works for something like Destiny or World of Warcraft. Those games have a leveling system where you only go up, and at each level you do a certain section of the content. When an expansion comes out, you have a player base sitting at the level cap, so the way to continue their journey is to add levels and content above and beyond what's already in the game. But MWZ is an extraction shooter. You can get to an equivalently max power state, but unlike those games, you can also get demoted back down the power curve if you die or, worst case scenario, crash. That tier 1 and 2 content isn't just something you're doing for the first couple hours with a new character, it's a permanent part of the expected gameplay loop, so it has to be repeatable. But pretty quickly after you get kicked back there for the first time, you realize that those early areas don't really have anything interesting to offer gameplay-wise. 95% of the contracts and activities you could do in the first two zones are the exact same things you could do in the Red Zone or the Dark Aether, just with worse rewards and slower and fewer zombies. So once you get comfortable with the higher tiers, when you do have to go back to that old stuff, you are very aware that you're getting a strictly lesser experience. It's not that it's fun in a different way, or that it has its own charm, it's just categorically worse. It's okay for failure to be punishing. I'm not saying that you should never be able to die and lose your stuff, but a game should always be, if not fun, at least engaging to play. Failure can still be interesting. What you're risking in a risk-reward shouldn't be having to play a bad game. Losing the opportunity to get the very best loot for a couple games while you build back up is the intended punishment. Those games being boring doesn't have to be a part of that. What I think this game needed more than even more Dark Ethers with even more schematics was something to differentiate the gray and even yellow zones beyond just difficulty. Some kind of unique draw that gave them some intrinsic value so that they were more than just stepping stones. Tier 3 and beyond can still be the ultimate goal, that's the point of the gameplay loop, but the journey to get there should be meaningful too. And if people do end up lingering in the lower tiers a bit longer because there is value there, that's a bonus. As it is, the high threat zone is the no-brainer choice if you have the equipment for it, so it ends up getting overcrowded and you have 5 or 6 squads fighting each other to get the 4 contracts that spawn in this tiny area. Giving players a reason to spend time elsewhere, even if that reason is just because it's fun, would naturally reduce that density. To be fair, there is one thing that Tier 1 and 2 have that Tier 3 and the Dark Ether don't, so if you wanted to take advantage of your time in those tiers to do something you couldn't do later, you could. The problem is, that thing is the mercenaries. Camps, strongholds, fortresses, and any contracts that spawn them are exclusive to the lower zones, but like I mentioned earlier, most players just don't find that whole enemy group fun to engage with. Really, it's the opposite of a draw. Tier 3 is even more enticing because there's no dead ether extractor or ground station contracts just clogging up space because you're never going to take them. Now, I'm not a game designer. I don't think I have some silver bullet solution that makes the lower tiers super fun and unique, but also doesn't go so far that it makes having to leave that area to go into Tier 3 for the better rewards feel like you're leaving the fun zone. And don't forget, it also has to be something that Treyarch and or Sledgehammer could realistically implement with their very obviously limited resources they had for the mode. Like, having different contracts in different areas would probably be a good start, but if that was possible, they probably would have done it. It seems like they didn't really have those resources, which is why even half of the story missions are just escorts or big bounty contracts. One thing I have stuck in my mind, even though I'm not 100% sure how it would work, is the equipable items from the Season 3 Dark Ether. I thought they were a super cool concept in a way that was very economical on the development side, and I was really disappointed they didn't at least come back for the next Ether Rift. If you haven't seen them, they're these items that you can hold in a rucksack slot to get some kind of gameplay modifier. One of them boosts your sprint speed while also applying the cryo freeze ammo mod just in an AoE around you, or another one makes some zombies explode if you kill them with a headshot. Again, it's not a fully formed idea, but I do wonder if there was a way to kill 2 birds with 1 stone here. Maybe around the medium threat zone, they could throw up some of those pillars so you could get something like that in the main map. The problem, and the reason that I'm not posing this as a solution, is that it would have to be temporary somehow, or tied to a contract, so you wouldn't be able to get it and then just immediately run into Tier 3 anyway, invalidating the point of putting it in the Tier 2 zone. Maybe instead specific buildings or fixed areas on the map could apply the effects, and that way they could guarantee where they're being used? I don't fully have it, but I do think there's the seed of an idea in there. The beauty of those items was that you get a lot for a little. The gameplay changes feel big, but implementation-wise they are using mechanics that already exist in the game. So it's very easy to imagine how it could be expanded to just apply different ammo mod effects, or maybe instead of increasing the drop rate of nukes, do it for full powers instead so you could go crazy with your specialist for a bit. Now, some people would say I'm making this out to be a way bigger deal than it really is in practice. The game does have a couple different systems to help you recover from failure. It's not as strict of an extraction shooter as it really could be. You have the schematics, so even if you don't extract as good as you came in, you can still supplement and be ready for at least one more game before everything's on cooldown. And you can have multiple backup characters, and containment levels don't fully reset on death, and there are a couple triangle puzzles in Tier 2, so you have a chance at that high-grade loot without going into the red zone. But even if all of that was enough to mitigate my concerns, which it isn't fully, there would still be one issue left. If the solution to those lower zones not being fun is just to implement a bunch of systems that make sure you never have to go there, then why do they exist? Is it really the intention of the design that you only spend time in the Tier 1 zone your first 1 or 2 lifetime games? And if so, why does it take up the biggest percentage of the map by area? I don't think that's the direction they should go. I think there is value in having different areas of the map pose different amounts of difficulty, if only to give it some variety instead of just feeling like one big homogeneous blob. That's why I'm definitely not advocating for just removing cooldowns on schematics, because I do like the concept of being forced into different experiences when you don't have your very best gear and you can't skip straight to the high threat zone. But to pull that off, those other areas have to actually offer those different experiences instead of just being raw difficulty modifiers. In the current system, whether you're a more casual player who just likes to hang around in Tier 2, or if you're going for Elder Sigil runs every single game, any time spent below your preferred difficulty level just feels like time wasted. I still stand by the fact that if they're looking for, at this point, a 5th mode, or maybe something to take the space of zombies during the off years, this is a good jumping off point. It would have to come back with double the content and a lot of tweaks, but the bones are there. I like the idea of a more free-flowing social space where they could also focus their objective-based design goals instead of trying to fit them awkwardly into the traditional mode. MWZ's flaws don't make the game irredeemable, and to that point, I've been having a lot of fun with it again recently. That's why I'm putting this out there, because I do hope they get another chance at it and they can tighten things up and truly make it shine.